Hello, guys. Want to dig into the dark, slimy roots of horror? Listen if you dare. Do you have a favorite school subject? Write the comment. Too Late is a scary story about strange foreign exchange student and two girls. Amy and I had been best friends since kindergarten. We were always there for each other. But now all that has changed. Amy isn't the same person she used to be. It all began when the foreign exchange student came into her house. I knew from the start that he would cause something bad to happen. I tried to stop it. But I was too late. I was sitting in my bedroom that afternoon when I got a telephone call from Amy. "Jasmine, you've got to come over here. Now." Amy's voice sounded breathless and a little scared. "What's the matter?" I asked. I knew Amy exaggerated sometimes, and I was in the middle of a good book. "He's here, the foreign exchange student my family is sponsoring. And he's so creepy. I can't stand it that he's going to be living in my house for the next 3 months." "I will be right there," I said, and hung up the phone. I rushed out of the house and ran the 4 blocks over to Amy's house. When I got there, she was waiting for me on the porch. "What's going on?" I whispered, trying to peer through one of the living room windows to see if I could see this guy who had Amy so upset. "I told my mom that I didn't want him living here," Amy said in a trembling voice. "But she said she's made a commitment to the school. He's come all the way from Austria. We're stuck with him for 3 months." "Well, if your mother thinks he's okay, maybe you're just imagining things," I said, trying to make her feel better. "Where is he?" Just then the front door opened and a tall, thin young man walked out onto the porch. I can't really describe the feeling that came over me when I saw him. But I know that my blood started to run cold, because goosebumps rose all over my body. All around me, the air seemed to have changed and become thick and full of evil. Amy cleared her throat uneasily and looked from me to him. "Jasmine. This is Kurt Muller." "Kurt, this is my friend Jasmine." I met the cold blue eyes that seemed to be staring straight into my brain. I finally stuttered out a hello. "Please tell your mother that I will be back for dinner, Amy," he said. "It was very nice to meet you, Jasmine." I smiled as he spoke to me in his polite, low voice. But when he smiled back, I caught my breath. His smile looked unnatural, like an animal baring his teeth. "Do you see what I mean?" Amy hissed in my ear as Kurt walked down the sidewalk. "Isn't he creepy?" "He's creepy, all right," I agreed. "But what are you going to do about it?" "Somehow you're going to have to put up with him for 3 months." "Not if I can convince my mom to make him leave," Amy said. "Come inside. I want you to see his stuff." We walked into Amy's house and bounded up the stairs. Amy and her parents slept on the 2nd floor. Kurt had been given the 3rd floor, which had been an old attic turned into a bedroom. Amy's older brother, who was now away at college, used to sleep there. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" I asked as we came to the closed door to the attic bedroom. "You've got to see this," Amy said as she pushed open the door. "He's not going to be back till dinner." "You heard him say that." I followed her into the low-ceilinged room, which was lit dimly by 2 small gable windows. "It's over here," Amy whispered, suddenly sounding guilty. I took a peek already when Mom drove him over to see the high school this morning. I went over to the bureau where Amy was standing, staring at the objects that had been carefully laid out on top of it. The silver medallion hanging from a silken cord caught my eye first. I started to pick it up to study the strange inscriptions on it, but Amy caught my hand. "Don't touch anything," she warned. "I don't want him to suspect that I've been up here." Beside the medallion was an old iron key, the kind you only see in movies set in old castles. And beside the key there was a thin book, bound in red leather. The writing on the cover was old-fashioned and ornate, and in a language I'd never seen before. "What do you think it means?" I whispered. "That's the problem," Amy said. "I have no idea. But it scares me." I looked at her eyes that were troubled by fear, and I suddenly wanted to do anything I could to help her. I sure wouldn't want this creep staying in my house. And I didn't want him scaring my best friend either. "Run down to your room and get a piece of paper and a pencil," I said. "Maybe if we can figure out what the words on this book mean, we can get your mother to get rid of him." Amy took off down the steps, and I looked around the room some more. I opened the closet door and saw his clothes hanging there. Most of them were black turtlenecks and black jeans. I knew other guys who dressed like that sometimes, but not all the time. Amy came back with the paper and pencil, and I took it from her to copy down the words on the red book. It was harder than I thought. I couldn't really tell what all the letters were because the type was so strange and fancy. Just as I was finishing the last letters of the last word, a sound floated up the staircase. It was the sound of the front door opening. I took one look at Amy's wide eyes and knew we had to get out of there fast. We tiptoed to the door and crept down the stairs to the second floor as we heard the sound of his footsteps on the stairs leading up from the entranceway. My heart was beating so hard that it hurt by the time we reached the second floor. Amy made a run for her bedroom and I followed. I turned around just as I was shutting her bedroom door behind me. He was standing in the hallway, his cold blue eyes hard and his lips drawn in a smirk. I slammed the door and sank down on the floor. "See?" Amy whispered. "He's horrible. I'm like a prisoner in my own house." I looked down at the strange words I'd copied onto the paper. I didn't know how I'd figure out what they meant, but I knew I had to find out. I took the paper with the book title on it to the library the next day. I searched through dictionaries and encyclopedias, but I couldn't find anything that looked remotely like those strange letters. Finally, I asked the librarian for help. "Where did you get these words?" she asked with a puzzled look on her face. "I believe they're in some European language, but I'm not familiar with it." I found them on an old book," I said, stumbling over my words. I wasn't sure I wanted to admit where I'd gotten the book title. "Maybe you can try the library at the university," she said, "if you can find a way there." I knew that wouldn't be any problem. My mother taught at the state university in our town. But she was away on a business trip and wouldn't be back for 3 days. I called Amy with my news as soon as I got home. "I don't know how I can wait," she said, her voice sounding panicky. "Mom thinks I'm crazy for being so nervous about him. But it's so awful having him stare at me across the table at breakfast and dinner. I can't even eat anymore." He heard Amy make a scared sound in her throat just then. She whispered into the receiver that she couldn't talk anymore and hung up. I knew why. Kurt must have come into the room. For a minute, I let myself think that Amy was just getting paranoid. But then I remembered how I'd felt around him. The 3 days dragged by until my mom came home. Every day in school Amy told me stories of weird things that Kurt had done. I knew it was a long shot that the book title could tell us anything about him, but I had to find out. Finally, Mom came home and agreed to take me to the university library. She even looked at the words I had written down, but said they didn't make any sense to her. Just before we left for the library that evening, I called Amy. "How are you doing?" I asked in a worried voice. "Not so good," Amy answered. "Mom has to go to a meeting tonight and Dad's away on a trip. I think I'm going to be left alone in the house with him." "Don't worry, I'll call you from the library," I said, "as soon as I find out what the book is about." "Okay, but don't forget," Amy said shakily. "I'm counting on you." The librarian guided me to a dusty corner of the reference room that was filled with old dictionaries in foreign languages. She pulled one from the shelf that had the same strange kind of letters on the front as the book had. "Try this," she said. "It's a language from the old Hungarian Empire. It was spoken in Transylvania years ago." Transylvania. I couldn't remember why that sounded familiar to me. I started going through the dictionary, searching for the words. Slowly, I wrote them down, one by one. A tasting guide to human. My heart started to beat faster as I searched for the meaning of the final word. It was in the front of the dictionary. The fear that was forming in my mind grew and finally came true as I found the final word. Blood. With an airy, I jumped up and ran to the telephone. I punched in Amy's telephone number and waited with my heart pounding. I heard the phone being picked up and a low voice answered, "Hello." It was him. Want to speak to Amy," I said, sounding desperate. "She's right here," he answered, and I could see the horrible grin that must be on his face. "Jasmine?" Amy's voice asked. To my surprise, she didn't sound scared at all. "Amy, I found out what the book title is. You've got to get away right now." "TT's too late now," Amy said dreamily. Too late. She was right. I was too late. Amy lives in Transylvania with Kurt's family now. She pretends that she went over there as a foreign exchange student. But I know better. Amy did leave me something to remember her by, though. The day she left, I found the thin red leather book in my mailbox. It was inscribed with my name and blood type. Good luck charm. Raymond slumped down in the back seat of the car. He didn't even have to look out the window to know what they were passing. Huge, spiny cactuses. Tumbleweeds rolling in the wind. And miles after miles of desert. "Where are we going, Dad?" Raymond's sister, Felita, asked from beside him. Then she turned to Raymond and rolled her eyes. "Same old place," her father answered with a grunt from the driver's seat. "You'll like seeing it again." "Right," Raymond mouthed to Felita. They were both bored with going to the old mining town. It was the only place their father wanted to drive to when he got a day off from work. They lived in an apartment building in the city. Just once, Raymond wished they could go somewhere exciting. Their father switched on the radio and began to hum along with the music. Raymond hunched farther down in his seat and shut his eyes. He could see the mining town in his mind. A few straggling shops. A gas station. But mostly it was a ghost town now. Nobody wanted to live there anymore. It was no wonder. "Think you'll see that old woman again, selling things?" Felita asked. Raymond opened his eyes and looked at her. "I don't know. But I brought my money along." "Don't waste it on her," Felita said. "That's just old, weird stuff she has." Raymond shut his eyes again and started to think about what the old woman had spread out on her blanket the last time they were in the town. He didn't know why, but he wanted something from her. And today, he planned on getting it. Raymond woke up as the car jolted to a stop. Looking around, he saw that they had arrived at the old town. "You kids can walk around," their father said, turning around. "I'm going to talk to Miguel over at the store." Raymond and Felita watched their father walk with a springy step to the old store where his friend Miguel worked. He would talk there for 2 or 3 hours. Then they would drive home again. "Come on, let's stretch our legs," Felita said. "I'm going to run up to the hill that looks over the town." "Go ahead," Raymond said. "I'll roam around here." He wasn't an athlete like Felita. She took off down the empty road at a fast jog. Raymond got out of the car and started to walk down the dusty street. Most of the buildings were vacant. The old clapboard was peeling paint. Signs dangled crookedly from rusting nails. It was a ghost town, all right. Raymond got the chills walking through it sometimes. Raymond turned to the left down the second alley he came to. That was where she had been last time, the old woman selling carved turquoise, strange-shaped rocks she found in the desert, and other odd things. His heart beat a little faster when he saw her there, sitting in the sun with a blanket spread out in front of her. "Hi," Raymond said as he walked up to her. The woman turned her wrinkled face up to him and stared at him with deep brown eyes. But she didn't say anything. Raymond squatted down on the ground and looked over the objects on the blanket. He was glad Felita wasn't along. She said the woman sold strange things, things that were full of superstition. Raymond picked up an animal's skull that had been polished by years of being out in the desert. He turned it over and over in his hands. "Coyote," the woman said to him. "Full of power. It will bring you strength." Raymond laid the skull back down and fingered a snakeskin. It was scaly and seemed strangely alive to his touch. The woman reached down and picked up a small piece of turquoise. She put it in Raymond's palm. "You could buy this as a gift," she said. Raymond shook his head. He wasn't looking for a gift. He was looking for something to carry with him. Something that would bring him luck. On the far corner of the blanket, he saw something he'd never noticed before. It was a rabbit's foot. As he reached for it, the woman grabbed his hand. "What's wrong?" Raymond asked. "I want to see it." The woman seemed to hesitate. Then she let go of Raymond's hand. He reached down and picked up the paw, which had gray fur and small claws at the end. It felt warm in his palm. "How much is it?" Raymond asked. "I can't sell it to you," the woman said. "It would be bad luck for me." "But I want it," Raymond said. The old woman picked up the paw and put it in Raymond's hand. "Take it," she muttered. "But be careful." Raymond stood up, holding the paw in one hand and stroking its fur with the other. He looked again at the woman and then ran down the alley to the main street. His father and Miguel were sitting on the steps of the store where Miguel worked. "What do you have there?" his father asked Raymond. "A rabbit's foot," Raymond said, holding out the foot for them to see. "It's going to be my good luck charm." Miguel's face screwed up when he saw the foot. "Did you get that from the old woman?" he asked. Raymond nodded yes. "You should throw it away, then," Miguel said. "She practices magic. That foot might still have the animal's spirit in it." Raymond looked down at the paw. He wasn't going to throw it away. He looked at Miguel and shrugged and then walked away. On the way back to the city in the car, Raymond turned the paw over and over in his hands. "That's gross," Felita said. "I wouldn't carry around part of a dead animal. Anyway, maybe the animal didn't want its foot cut off. Did you ever think of that?" Raymond looked down at the rabbit's foot. Suddenly it scared him. Maybe there was a reason the old woman had refused to take money for it. Maybe he should throw it away. But instead, he pushed it down into his jeans pocket so Felita couldn't see it anymore. Raymond started to close his eyes, but the sudden screech of the car's tires made him jump in his seat. He looked out the front window and saw a huge jackrabbit bounding across the road in front of the car. A second later, there was a loud, grinding crash, and everything went black. Raymond, are you all right?" It was Felita's voice, calling him out of the darkness that had drowned him. Raymond opened his eyes. Felita and his father were standing over him. Both of them looked very sad and very concerned. There were bright lights all around. "What happened?" Raymond asked. "Where am I?" "You're in a hospital," his father said. "We had an accident. It was that rabbit. It was crazy. It jumped in front of the car over and over again. It was so scary," Felita said, her voice shaking. "It didn't leave after the wreck. Dad and I were okay. But you were lying on the ground. And the rabbit, it came up and pulled something out of your jeans pocket." Raymond felt a shudder of fear travel through him. Then he looked away from their faces to the bottom of the bed. One leg was propped up and wrapped in bandages. He tried to wiggle his toes. But there was nothing to wiggle, nothing at all. "That rabbit's foot," his father said. "You should have thrown it away. It was bad luck." Can you solve this mystery? Prize money is a creepy riddle about a contest to win $1,000. The only problem is what happens if you win the contest. Think about this one for a little while. A young boy was at the carnival. He was walking past a kiosk where an old man was sitting. "Do you want to play a game?" the old man said to him. The young boy was intrigued. "What kind of game?" he asked. "It's a very simple game," said the old man. "I will tell you the rules. I have 10 large metal boxes. Inside one of the boxes is the prize money. $1,000. $1,000, huh?" asked the boy. "What's the catch?" "The boxes are sturdy and strong," said the old man. "Much too strong to be opened with your bare hands. They are also airtight and cannot be damaged by a hammer, an axe, or even a chainsaw. So they're impossible to open," said the boy. "Not impossible," said the man. "I have a blowtorch which can be used to open the boxes." "Is there a time limit?" asked the boy. "You can take as much time as you want," said the old man. "When you find the prize money, it's all yours. So, do you want to play the game?" "Well, I don't how I could possibly lose," said the boy. "Okay. I'll play your game." The old man smiled. "I'll make it very easy for you," he said. "There are 10 metal boxes, but if you give me $5, I will start you right next to the prize money." The boy happily took out his wallet and handed a crisp $5 note to the old man. There was a mischievous grin on the old man's face. The game started. The prize money was right in front of the boy. He could see it. He could touch it. Even though he won the game, the boy was never able to spend the money. He died shortly after he won the game. How did the boy die? The door chain is a scary riddle about a young man who stays in his sister's apartment one night. Can you solve this mystery? My sister is an art teacher and, 10 months ago, she rented a cheap 2-bedroom apartment to use as a studio. She never actually lived there. She just used it as a place where she could paint and store her art supplies. When I left college, I started a new job in the city. I desperately needed a place to stay, but I hadn't received my first paycheck, so I couldn't afford to pay rent. Luckily enough, my sister offered to let me stay in her apartment until I got on my feet. She gave me the keys and I moved my stuff in the next morning. That evening, I arrived home from work. I was excited about having my own place for the first time. My sister had told me that there was a lot of crime in the neighborhood and to always be sure I locked the front door. To be extra safe, I locked the door with the deadbolt and the chain. In the kitchen, I made myself some chicken curry with rice. Then I read some comics until it was time for bed. I checked the door and the gas and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. It must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning and I heard the sound of someone unlocking the deadbolt on the front door. Must be my sister coming to paint, I thought to myself. I heard her go into the room next door to my bedroom. That was the room she used as a studio. I'd been in there earlier and it was empty except for some canvas and paints. I was tired and I had work again the next morning, so I stayed in bed. Through the wall, I could hear her mumbling and laughing to herself. These artists are weird people, I said to myself, and it wasn't long until I fell asleep again. When I woke up the next morning, my sister was gone and I was alone in the apartment. I got out of bed, showered and dressed myself. I quickly poured myself a bowl of cornflakes and ate it hungrily. Then I grabbed my briefcase and went out the front door. When I turned around to lock the front door, I was suddenly terrified. After work, I went home to my parents' house. I never went back into the apartment after that. I was too scared. Why was he scared? The thing in the picture is a scary story about a boy who plays scary games and reads horror tales when his parents go out for the night. Robert was a shy and antisocial teenager of 16, who spent most of his free time at his computer, doing what he enjoyed most, which was playing scary games and reading scary stories. His parents both worked long hours and never had much time for their son. One night, his parents went out and Robert spent the night playing games on his laptop. He had his headphones on and was listening to scary music. By midnight, his parents still had not come home, and he decided to stay up and wait for them. He went to the sink to get himself a glass of water, but when he came back to his laptop, he noticed a black spot on his computer screen. He rubbed the screen with his finger, but the stain did not disappear. Robert tried to ignore it and continued to play his game. A few minutes later, he noticed that the stain appeared to have increased in size. He wet his finger and rubbed the screen again, but the black spot wouldn't go away. The spot slowly began to increase in size and Robert started to get scared. He removed his headphones and heard the sound of heavy breathing. A chill ran down his spine as he realized that it wasn't a black spot at all. It was actually the shadow of something that had crept up behind him. It was the thing in the picture. When his parents came home that night, they found their son lying face down on his laptop. His throat had been cut from ear to ear and there was blood all over the keyboard. On the screen was the text of the story you are reading now. How do I know this? Because I wrote this story. I am the thing in the picture.